Welcome back, everybody, to Constructive Uncoupling, the podcast devoted to amicable divorces. I'm Judy Weigel, your host and amicable divorce expert. Why? Because that's all I do, amicable divorces. The podcast title for today, Tips for Living in the Same House While Getting Divorced, is one of the biggest challenges when you are getting divorced. Living in the same house during marriage is challenging enough, as we know. Now you're filing for divorce. How does this work if you need to live together for a while? Well, anybody living in California knows that rents are unbelievably expensive. And one of the things that becomes a commonality between so many people getting divorced is that they are living in the same house while they're filing for divorce. Living in the same house during a marriage is challenging enough. When you're filing for divorce, it presents challenges beyond belief. Even in a good marriage, it's challenging to live with another adult. Your daily habits have to mesh well, or your spouse's habits can't annoy you to the point of frustration. But when you're ready to file for divorce, continuing to live together is one of the biggest challenges for several reasons. Number one, your emotional boundaries go up because you go into protective mode as you are uncoupling. Now, if you've been listening to these podcasts for a while, go to episodes 10 through 13. In those episodes, I read from a book called The Good Karma Divorce. It was written by a woman named Judge Michelle Lawrence. It's on Amazon. I found this book to be one of the best books to read through divorce because what Judge Lawrence does is lays out the normal patterns that people go through emotionally so that you can understand each other and be prepared and not think anything horrifying is happening, well, worse than the horrifying nature of divorce, of course. But lots of little tips in there. So here's what she said in one chapter. The spouse who's going to initiate the discussion of divorce starts to change their behavior first, thereby perplexing the other spouse, the unknowing spouse. But this is normal, she continues. The initiating spouse turns inward to regroup so that they can have the talk about separating. It's not a normal talk to have. You're married, and now you have to talk about separating. When we go into a relationship, our boundaries go down so that we can be free and we can be ourselves. But when we go about uncoupling, our boundaries go up. We go into defense mode because we know we're going to hurt, shock, surprise the other spouse. Just think of when we have to deliver bad news, say, to our employees, if we're an employer, or friends or family members. But when we're employers, when we talk about letting go of our employees, that's horrible. Our behavior slightly changes because we're starting the uncoupling process in our own heads and hearts before we have to give the bad news to our employees, or in the case of divorce, before we have to give the bad news to our spouse. Second, divorce is an extremely emotional experience, and each spouse goes on their emotional roller coaster differently, at different speeds, and at different stages of the uncoupling process. There's no real timeline for the emotional side of the uncoupling process. So the person who's going to initiate the discussion with the other spouse goes into protective mode first. And you will notice that spouse's behavior changes. Quite often, the unknowing spouse thinks there may be an affair, but really it's just their spouse putting up walls and barriers to protect themselves before they deliver the bad news to the other spouse. And then when the other spouse gets this news, now both people are on an emotional ride that has an end. You just don't know when that end is. We really have to let each other take that journey the way we have to take that journey, and it's slightly different. There's no blueprint to follow. Everyone is different, but everyone experiences the need for alone time, and this has to be honored by each spouse. People need alone time to process their emotions. You need to be quiet and think. You need to do what you have to do to process. Do you overeat? Do you binge watch television? Do you sleep a lot? Do you engage in extreme shopping like I probably would? Do you clean out your closets? Or in my case of emotional healing, even after the divorce was final, I went to work every day and I came home and sat in complete silence for 3 months until one day I was done processing. I woke up light of heart and happy. So whatever it takes is what we have to do, and you just can't do it at home. You do need little outlets. If you have to live together, you have to create little outlets to give you the alone time that you need. Now, here's an extra special case. So what do you do when there's domestic violence that's been filed for, and this is the most horrifying part of it, and the judge lets the perpetrator back in the house? There was a case that I recently heard of where there was domestic violence and a minor in the house. The woman started to file for divorce and then also had to go to a domestic violence hearing for a temporary restraining order. That was given for 30 days. The divorce was filed for. Husband was served with the petition. And then the couple went back for the permanent restraining order, and guess what? The judge let the husband back in the house. The judge did not grant the permanent restraining order. Can you imagine what it was like to live in that house with a minor child? These are just blow-ups waiting to happen. That woman had to find some place to go to. She's in the same house, I understand. But if that ever happens, you do need an outlet. You need family or friends to go to because you just may need that physical separation. Number 4, people need alone time to learn how to live on their own again, or for the first time. So, there's a lot of people that just went from their parents' house to their marriage, and the marriage isn't working out. And so now they need to uncouple, they need to file for divorce, but they've never lived alone. So that's really part of the process. How do you learn to live alone? And living alone, or at least having alone time, is so important, but you just don't have that experience of being alone. That complicates things. If you are a parent, you will organically start to form your own relationship with your children, slightly different from the relationship you had prior to the divorce filing. And that truly can't begin until you're living by yourself, but it kind of actually starts as people start to act more independently in the filing process. And if they're still living together, it's a way of asserting independence. So you're in the same house, you're filing, you have children. You're both going to be on your emotional roller coaster. You're both going to be in protective mode. And now you have to interface with your children. I guarantee you, you will both start forming your own independent relationships with your children, even though you're living together. When you're not living together, though, and you're co-parenting, you are going to form independent relationships with your children anyway. You will. You will have your slightly different parenting style, although you will agree on some givens. Homework, TV, diet, but just that connection. It is normal for that connection to be slightly different with each parent and their children. Number 6, living in separate bedrooms is part of the way in which people are expected to live by the court system, and it allows each spouse to have space unto themselves. But what do you do when there aren't enough bedrooms to accommodate the physical separation? Well, you have to get creative. There's the couch in the living room for sleeping, or some people go in the kids' room and sleep, or if you have a study, you convert that into a bedroom. Occasionally, you have a friend or relative's house you can go to. Whatever you have to do to get space and physical and emotional distance is what you'll have to do, or your emotions will escalate. They really will. You absolutely need space and alone time while you're still functioning under the same house. And C, you get through the filing as efficiently and in as little time as possible. So you start the filing and you're living together. Don't drag your feet on the filing. Get things done as soon as you can so that you can move the process along and establish separate residences at the earliest possible time. So now we go to the next phase. Why do people live together while they're in the middle of filing for a divorce? Number one reason is financial. Either one spouse needs to find employment first, or both spouses need to reorganize their finances so that they can both have homes that accommodate them and their children. While you're in the middle of filing for divorce, the disclosure forms become your best friends. So once you file the petition and respond to the petition, the next steps are the disclosure forms. One is a financial statement, and the financial statement lays out what each spouse makes, and there is a page for the projected and current monthly budgets for each spouse. You cannot know how valuable that is. It is so important to do that financial statement. As much as you may not want to face it, and it's the spouse who's not working and there may be a lot of debt to deal with, those forms are your reality, and I completely understand why you wouldn't want to fill them out, or at least drag your feet on filling them out. But honestly, the sooner you can get to them, the better. The sooner we can face our reality, the better we are moving ahead. And that financial disclosure form will really help you understand what you have to deal with financially and what you have to do to deal with your financial responsibilities. And those are the forms, by the way, that we use to run child support and spousal support. So the sooner you can get them to whoever's working with you, they can get you child and spousal support numbers, and the better you'll be able to reorganize. B, for the sake of the children, but that gives the children mixed messages. So for the sake of the children, we live together because we have to financially. But that gives the children mixed messages, as I just said, and sets up their expectations unrealistically to think that maybe their parents won't divorce. All right, so if any of you have listened to other podcast episodes, you know that my guilty little recreational secret is watching Bravo and all of the Real Housewives series. So on the Real Housewives of Potomac, I forget the people's names, but there's this one couple and they're still on the show. They filed for divorce. They continue to live together. They got divorced and they continue to live together and function as a family. Now that was interesting because yes, it gave the kids mixed messages beyond belief, but I think they were the couple that really couldn't function as a married couple. They actually liked each other, enjoyed being around each other, but were the types of people that needed their independence so that they could function. And so that was a really interesting example, I thought, of not the norm, of people that live together, financial reasons, but also for the children's sake. And just filing for divorce was the thing that turned the relationship around. And then there was a couple I mediated for who really didn't want to file for divorce until they were able to establish two residences. So they came to mediate. They were lovely people, but they didn't want to file until they had the means to have two different residences. So I thought there were two interesting examples to give you that were a little different than what I've just been talking about. You know, everybody's situation has a slightly different color to it, and we have to be creative so that we can work things out for the best for ourselves and the best for the children. All right, section number 3. How can you make the best out of living together during the divorce? All right, A, establish boundaries and guidelines. Well, not like War of the Roses, where Michael Douglas and Kathleen Turner made a line down the middle of the house that neither could cross, but of course they did because they had to. No, you have to establish new rules. So the normal things that we do in the house, meals are cooked, TV is watched, laundry is done, the house is cleaned, people go to bed. You have to really establish a few new rules, like maybe each spouse starts doing their own laundry. The spouse who has been doing laundry for both people, since the other spouse is going to have to do it for himself or herself, let's start doing that. Let's start assigning different responsibilities in those normal daily tasks that you're going to end up doing on your own. Cooking meals is another thing. Cleaning the house is another thing. So start looking at those normal daily tasks and establish how each person is going to assume responsibility for doing their own. Maybe you trade off cooking meals each night. Maybe that's possible. All right, B, establish emotional boundaries. Different from physical boundaries. Establish emotional boundaries. Detail things you're allowed to say, for example, to one another, the tone of voice you have to use. And I can't tell you how important this is, because most of the time leading into a divorce, the kids can tell there's something wrong. Conversations aren't very good, there's fighting. But once in a while, it's silent, and all of a sudden there's a divorce. Even in the silent situation, you still have to have those emotional boundaries, because you're going to get on that emotional roller coaster. And that roller coaster can change the way you have been behaving. It can make you jumpy. It can make you snap out more. So maybe you should make some guidelines for yourselves that when one person is starting to snap and act a little differently, the other person can be a bit more understanding and just say, hang on there. It seems like you're getting a little emotional. Let's just do a little time out. It's something, what makes sense to you. But you do have to establish emotional boundaries so that you can treat each other in a respectful manner while you're still living in the same house. C, establish times and conditions under which you both discuss the divorce and the settlement terms. Best if the children aren't there. They really shouldn't be around when you're discussing things. And better yet, when you're not tired and you're not distracted. So you're going to have to deal with the terms of the settlement. You're going to have to pick some times where you can do it. Don't just go to your spouse and start talking. Don't catch your spouse off guard. That's a lot of what happens sometimes. Pick times where you're both clear, where you're both calm, where you're organized, and you know you're going to have the conversation. Don't catch the other spouse off guard. D, definitely establish separate bedrooms, or stay with a friend every now and then to create space that each spouse needs to think and breathe. You know, hopefully you do have friends or family that you can rely on, because you just may have to be out overnight once in a while just for a balance. And there's nothing wrong with that. There really isn't. It's okay. You need that time alone. If you have children, this presents an emotional challenge because their lives have to continue unfettered, if possible. They still have their daily routines of school, social activities, and social engagements. Life has to continue for the children as smoothly as possible, and parents still have to attend school activities. So while you're still living together in the middle of the divorce, definitely support the children the same way you've always supported them, as a team. That's so very important to the health and welfare of your children. And don't forget, you're modeling behavior to your children every minute of every day. When you're married with no intention to divorce, or when you're going through a divorce, you're teaching your children values, you're teaching them communication skills, compassion, respect, and you're teaching them how to work through a difficult time. So if your children know you're getting divorced and you're living under the same roof, let them know you're doing it for financial reasons, and you're doing it so that both parents can help support the children in the best way possible. When you do that and you work as a team to divorce and you work as a team to restructure the daily living conditions for your children, you're modeling to them how to work through a difficult time, and your children will so respect you for this. They need these life lessons. Life isn't perfect. We all go through tough times. And so maybe you can use this to help your children see how to work through one of the most difficult situations ever, getting divorced. F, what happens when one spouse finds another partner and wants to engage in an intimate relationship and date while living together? Could anything get any harder than that? Oh my gosh. The absolute worst thing you can do when you have a new relationship is to stay out overnight. Horrible. And why is it so horrible? First of all, it lacks respect for your spouse and for your children. It doesn't mean you shouldn't or can't have another relationship, but when you're still living together, you're throwing insult after injury when you stay out late. You don't come in till 3 or 4 in the morning. It causes so much upheaval in the home, first, because the other spouse doesn't know if something has happened to you, just like when your marriage was intact. Of course you're going to worry about the other person, and just because you're getting divorced doesn't mean you don't care if something happens to the others, to you. You know, you both care. Nobody wants anything horrible to happen to the other person, right? Right? No. And so the friction it causes between you and your spouse rubs off on the children. And if you can remain child-centered, this is kind of the key. If you can remain child-centered at all times, then coming home before bedtime, if you go on a date, would be a much better way of gratifying yourself with an emotional outlet while keeping the household calm and consistent. I don't know if you know anybody in this situation, or if you're in the situation and you don't see why this is important. If the shoe is on the other foot, think about it. I think it would be important. So just be mindful of that. And lastly, let's just recap everything. What would be the best way to divorce before establishing 2 households while living in the same household? A, do a financial analysis of both of your budgets before filing, and add on child and spousal support once you've filed. So a lot of people do pencil out a budget before they start to file because they just kind of need to know what's going on with their money, but a lot of people don't. So if you've already penciled out a budget, you're ahead of the game. Finish that budget once you start filing for divorce, because until you start filing, you don't know what child and spousal support are if they're part of the equation. Now, there are online calculators that you can use for free, and you can plug in information yourself, and a lot of people have used them so that before they file, they can get a general idea of child and spousal support. And quite often, they're on target. I've received a lot of paperwork from people who have found those online calculators, and I've come up with virtually the same number, so it's great. But a lot of people don't know how to use them. They don't know whether to put gross or net income in the calculator, and they misunderstand childcare versus babysitting. So when you get a professional involved, that person will run the calculator, at least that's the way it is in California. They'll run the calculator correctly for you, and now you'll really have a full picture of what it's going to take financially for each spouse to have their own household. B, while still living in the same house, create boundaries. Remember, like we said, not like War of the Roses, but with private spaces and private time that you each respect. So, if you have a really small house and space is at a premium, maybe you could decide for each spouse to have an activity once or twice a week, at least once a week, so that you can give the house to the other spouse by themselves. That would actually be a very cool thing that you could do. So if you can't carve out space, one spouse do an activity, and that helps the spouse who's out of the house that night, because you need to walk away from the pressure of the divorce. And if you can go out with friends, hopefully not talk about the divorce, just go out and have some fun, this would be great. And of course, this is when a guest house really comes in handy, isn't it? But no, that would be very, very cool. If you can carve out private spaces, if not, carve out private time by letting each spouse have the house by themselves once or twice a week. C, live the co-parenting plan. If you have children, live the co-parenting plan while you're in the same house so that adjustments can be made before there are two households. Like, and I mentioned this before, making meals, doing laundry, doing homework with the children, doing school pickups and drop-offs, and definitely making sure the kids get to social engagements. So you can do dry runs while you're living in the same house. And, duties are assigned within each household. One person takes care of certain things, the other person takes care of other things. But now you're each going to take care of everything. So this would be a perfect time for each of you to pretend you're maintaining your own household by doing the things you're going to end up doing on your own. And for those of you who don't cook, excellent time to learn how to cook. And D, do the healing work while you're in the same space. The healing work is therapy. You can't get away from it. If you can go as a couple to divorce therapy, that would be great. If you can get a therapist that understands the divorce process in terms of what you have to deal with as you're filing and writing up agreements, that would be perfect. But at least get a therapist so you can stop blaming each other. That's really the key in having an amicable divorce versus a contentious divorce. Can you stop blaming each other? Nothing good comes from blame. And that's another thing. It's another, episodes 10 through 13, I referenced the good karma divorce. The good karma divorce. I really can't encourage you more heavily to buy this book. I have it sitting in my conference room, and everybody takes a picture of it or writes down the name. The Good Karma Divorce by Judge Michelle Lawrence. You can get it on Amazon. She has several chapters that really help you. She's not a therapist, but she's seen so much in her courtroom that she really does understand the key to getting along and having a level of amicability with a divorce is to stop blaming each other. Maybe forgiveness is far off in the distance, but removing blame is the first step towards emotional healing. So there's a new couple that hasn't come to me yet, but they've both called me and we've talked. I can't wait to meet this couple live and in person. I feel like this is a gift that I'm being given with these two people. They did what I'm suggesting for you to do. They went to a therapist and they worked through the emotions of anger so that they could get divorced amicably. And they said it wasn't easy. They really had to go through their own level of self-awareness, their own level of responsibility. And even if one spouse, this isn't them, but even though one spouse may be a huge perpetrator in this scenario, figure out why. Because more than likely, that spouse, like most of us, we don't really intend to hurt each other. We don't. Sometimes we have personality disorders, narcissism, sociopathic behavior, bipolar behavior, split personalities. I mean, there's so much of that. There really is. Nobody wants to be born with these personality disorders, these personality challenges, yet they're here. Or a lot of times our behavior stems from the way we were brought up. We learn certain behavior from our parents, and we don't even know we're modeling it back to our children and to our other spouse. And so when you go to therapy, if you get the right therapist, they will really go back to what was your relationship with your parents? What did you learn from your parents in terms of parenting skills? How did that feel to you as a child? Does it look like you're modeling that behavior back? And when you can go through those steps, the other spouse can stop blaming. Because most of us do have the ability to empathize. We do have the ability to be compassionate. And that's really what we need. And then accept that life goes on. It really does. You know, maybe we have some challenges ahead, financial being one of them, or living alone for the first time being another. But we're going to find our way. You really are. You're going to be healthy again. You're going to be happy again. But that blame is going to prevent you from moving forward. So this is my message about how to take one of the tips for one of the biggest challenges you're going to have, which is living together while you're filing for divorce. And I hope these tips have helped you. Thank you again for listening to Constructive Uncoupling, the podcast devoted to amicable divorces. I'm Judy Weigel, your host. If you would like to give me any ideas for upcoming episodes, I'm always open to listening. Any comments on anything I've said in this one or others, you can reach me by email at Judy, Judy, at constructiveuncoupling.com. Judy at constructiveuncoupling.com. Thank you so much, and we'll talk to you on the next episode.